Hello, everybody, and good morning if you're on the West Coast. I think it's actually morning for almost everybody, so that's good. Um, yeah, as Alex mentioned, this particular set of slides goes well beyond what we'll be able to cover in an hour. So I do encourage you to have a look at the information when it's posted following, because there'll be a lot more in there. I also want to, before I get going, just mention that I'm coming to you today from the ancestral unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Squamish nations, and would encourage everybody to take a moment and find out more about the lands on which they live, work, and play, and the communities that have been there for time immemorial before us. As Alex mentioned, I'm going to talk about cybersecurity hygiene, and there's a few things that I want to cover off before I get deep into this. The first of which is really about our collective background. Everybody really approaches this coming to it from very different technical and experiential backgrounds. So you may have vast amounts of experience with computers and understand networking and maybe even are doing research in that area, whereas somebody else might be still a little bit uncomfortable with even taking the lid off of a computer or doing anything more than just using basic office functions. So I try to do as much as I can to make this as broadly applicable as possible. But that is one of the things that I would encourage you to interrupt me for. If I start using acronyms or talking about something and you're sitting there going, I have no idea what he's talking about, please do interrupt me, drop something in the chat. I can watch the chat as well, and just ask, because the goal here is to make it as accessible as possible. The other aspect of this, I'm going to cover a whole bunch of different things that you can do in your professional and personal life to make you more cyber secure. Please do not feel that you need to do all of them. Cybersecurity, like many things, is built on layers. The more you do, the better you'll be. But every single thing that you do, no matter how small, will make a difference. So even if you only get one item out of what I share today that you can take away and use in a practical sense, it's still going to be a net benefit for you. And I know that all the stuff we hear about on a daily basis can sometimes be a little bit overwhelming. And the most important thing is don't let it overwhelm you to the point where you go, oh, it's too much. I can't do anything. I'm just not going to do anything. Much better to do some simple stuff and make a difference in your life, some of the easy ones. And as I get into the bulk of the meat and potatoes of this presentation, you'll see how you can kind of gauge how difficult something will be. Another thing I want to briefly touch on before I get into the more practical side of things is the concept of trust. And in cybersecurity, trust is a word we hear a lot. You may have heard of trust no one, zero trust, trust but verify. There's all these terms involving trust that are bandied about in the cybersecurity realm quite frequently. But it's worth understanding and maybe taking a little bit of a thought experiment around trust when it comes to cybersecurity. So I've tried to work up a bit of an analogy to this, and I'm going to start with a ladder. So let's say I go into the forest and I pick a tree and I cut down that tree and I mill my own lumber and I get a good design for a ladder, assuming I know how to do that. And I build it myself and I use all the correct materials and I test it. I'm really not trusting anybody but myself when I do all that stuff. Assuming I have the skills necessary to do that from scratch, which I actually don't, but assuming I did, I could have myself a ladder that I wouldn't have to trust anybody else in terms of the construction of that ladder. But I think it would go without saying that the vast majority of us would probably just go down to the hardware store and buy a ladder. And when you think about that, just something as simple as this wooden ladder, you're actually putting a lot of trust into a whole bunch of other people. You're trusting that somebody picked a good tree, milled it properly, designed the ladder appropriately for its weight rating, used the correct materials. The materials weren't damaged before they were built or during transport. You're assuming that it was stored correctly and didn't sort of rot while it was waiting to get sold and hasn't and was, it's fit for purpose. It's the right ladder for your intended use. Now, where am I going with this? That's a very simple example. It was actually one of the simpler examples I could come up with. And it's amazing how in this day and age, so much is built on trusting a whole bunch of other things. But as you start thinking about what we trust when it comes to cybersecurity, that landscape grows exponentially. So just a simple piece of software, we're not only trusting the developer, we're trusting the people who made the computers and the networks and the platforms on which it's hosted, all the libraries that go into it. There's a vast amount of trust we provide out whenever we start using something. So that concept, I just wanted to kind of put out there as a foundation element, something to consider as we dig into some of these things that you can do to make yourself more secure. And finally, before I get into it, one final thing. If you are working at an institution, part of a lab, in a company, it doesn't really matter. Regardless of what I might tell you today or what you might read about current best practice or new, this is the most secure way to do something, it's always best to follow whatever the policies and procedures are of wherever it is you're working. And that's because that whole institutional structure and their procedures will all be based around those policies. And even though there might be something that is technically more best practice of the day, and your institution might be doing something that seems out of date, it's probably still more secure to follow what they're asking you to do just because everything is structured around that. So regardless of what I might tell you, if you're told to do something else, please do that. It's also so that I don't get sued by anybody later. Ha. All right. I have two different kinds of slides for the majority of the rest of this presentation. One of them looks roughly like this. This is what I would refer to as a proactive slide. It's something that you can do in advance to make yourself more secure. The left-hand side tells you a bit about what that might be, but the most important thing I want you to look at is the top right corner where there's three bars of sort of measure about this particular tip. The implementation sort of indicates roughly how hard this is going to be to start doing it. Interference is how much it's going to impact your day-to-day life. And the improvement is, as it would sound, how much of a cybersecurity improvement this might be. And there's often a bonus tip I've kind of included that relates. The other kind of slide is a reactive slide. This is more about what should I do when something's just happened. Um, you might have a situation where you've experienced a particular thing. It's too late to be protecting yourself in advance. So what do I do about it now? And this one only has one measure, and it's just how much technical expertise do you need to possess in order to take this course of action. I also like to show in advance that all the resources that I'm going to mention, I hope I've got all of them, are here. I've also included both UBC and ARC's related cybersecurity links at the top here. They are specific to the institution, obviously, but some of it do apply more broadly across research and just general cybersecurity. For example, on the Privacy Matters site, there's some really good guidance around travel. And on our security and privacy site at ARC, we have some really good information on information classification and various other presentations and risk assessment type stuff that might be of interest. The other ones are all very generic and or they're tools that I will talk about. Okay, so that's a whole bunch of preamble. So let's dig into this. And the very first slide I'm going to bring up is one of those reactive slides. This is something's gone wrong. I think something's happened. I think that I've been hacked. My computer's all frozen. I think I just clicked a link I shouldn't have clicked. I just got a weird text message and I'm worried about it. Any one of those things that gets your heart starting to pump. This is a technique that I actually learned when I was working in search and rescue at the Coast Guard. And I know a lot of first responding groups do the same thing. And I see that in the chat. Yes, the slides will be shared. And I think Alex will post a link probably again near the end. This is a way to sort of protect yourself from making knee-jerk decisions when you really shouldn't do so. And it's called SAP, and it stands for Stop, Assess, Plan, and Proceed. And this works very well in a cybersecurity response scenario. So the first thing to do is just stop. Don't do anything. Take a deep breath. Let that shock dissipate from whatever might be happening. When we were doing search and rescue on a high-speed response craft and there's all the engines and everything, we'd actually just shut off the motors and just quiet for a moment for everybody to just take a moment and see what's going on. And during that, you make an assessment. You take stock of the situation. You try to collect as many facts as you can when you're in that more relaxed moment of peace. See what's going on. Read what you're actually seeing. Read through the message that's come up again. Maybe check and see is it's the hard drive light blinking on your computer. That might give you some insights as to whether it's really frozen or not. So collect all those facts together. Then once you've got the facts, and that first bit could take a minute, could take 5 minutes, depends on the situation. If a house is burning down in front of you, you're not going to stand there for 5 minutes just peacefully in a Zen mode watching it, but you will take 30 seconds before you go rushing in. Um, and then come up with a plan. Plan what you're going to do based on the actual facts rather than based on just a little bit of shock. And only then, once you've got a plan, do you proceed with doing something. And your plan might even say, hey, this is beyond me. I'm going to call somebody. Or the plan might be, I'm going to try a few things first to make sure that my computer is actually really frozen. There's a bunch of different things you might do based on the situation. But as a general rule, anytime, and this doesn't apply only to cybersecurity or some emergency situation that you may encounter, it applies to all kinds of things, anything that gets your heart rate going, to just do that SAP procedure. Slow down, take a moment, assess what's going on before you jump in. So that can take a few seconds or a few minutes, but it's a very useful technique you can apply, and I like to put it into people's minds. Now, the next set of slides, which is where I usually start, are all around using unique passwords. And I'm actually going to skip through it today. And there's two reasons for that. One, I think a lot of people have heard this message already. And two, if you're interested in it, you can go and read the details of what I would tell you anyway on my blog, which is linked at the end of the slide deck. But it takes a lot of time, and I wanted to dig into some of the other tips that may be less common. So I'm going to zip through a bunch of slides here. Talk about using password vaults, using multi-factor authentication and how important that is, avoiding just clicking an MFA link if it comes up on your phone because they try to get you that way as well. And I'm going to jump to this slide instead and talk about some other things related to authentication. So again, you can review those in the slide deck. All of that is on my blog. You can read in detail. And I'm always happy for people to reach out and ask questions independently later as well. But this one is something that's come up a few times in the past. And we often think about usernames and passwords as being our primary way to protect our access to something. And it's important to keep in mind that that's one way, but there's often other ways that you can access something. And it means that certain information that may seem innocuous at the start can actually be quite sensitive. And the best example I came up recently was when I was helping my parents cancel their flight. They had booked a trip to go and see a family member. Plans needed to change. They needed to cancel the flight, and they were having trouble doing it. So they asked me to help them. And so I went to the website, it was Air Canada, and the website goes, okay, what's their last name? Okay, I put in their last name. Then it asked me what's their flight booking reference. It's on the boarding pass. I put that in, and that's all I needed. It didn't ask me for anything else. And it got me thinking as soon as I did that, that I see people post their boarding passes on social media all the time. And it has everything you need on it to access that flight and cancel it and change it, which means that it's basically the same as a username and password. But we don't think of it like that because it's just a boarding pass. But that boarding pass actually has everything you need to get in. There's a lot of other information that works this way. Some of it might not be quite that direct that it'll get you directly in, but I'm sure most here have heard about the effectiveness of people stealing other people's identities and doing social engineering to convince support folks at a bank or a telephone company to do things with your account that you really wouldn't want, pretending to be you. And quite often, as soon as your name is on something and whatever that something might be, that can provide a lot of information to somebody like that. So the point of this tip is to just consider those other authentication methods that you may have. And I would generally say if your name and address is on something you receive in the mail, take the extra 30 seconds to shred it rather than just throw it in the recycling to make sure that it doesn't become something somebody else could use. And also, and I've got a slide on this further down, be really wary about what you share on social media and what information might be printed on it. Sort of along the same line as that tip is to think about your recovery pathways. And by that, I mean, every time you log into something, usually there's a link down at the bottom that says, help me, I forgot my password. And you click on that link and it gives you some other way where you can either reset the password or bypass all the other security you might have in place to get in. A great example is I've got, a username that's not my email address and a really long password, and I've turned on multi-factor authentication. But I can click that I forgot my password link and it's just going to send an email to my email box. And if I click on a link in there, it bypasses all that other stuff. So the most important thing to secure in that scenario is actually that email, rather than all that other stuff. And it's important to think of what different sites use for this sort of thing. Sometimes they'll ask you information like your social insurance number or your social or your mother's maiden name or your favorite pet. They do these, what they refer to as knowledge-based questions, which you should always lie about, by the way. If it asks me my favorite pet, I mash my fingers on the keyboard a little bit until I get a bunch of goo, and that's my favorite pet's name. And hopefully I have never have to tell it to somebody over the phone, but it's better than them being able to look up my pet names from Facebook and then be able to try logging in as me. Um, your birth date's another really common one. And that's why I also recommend anytime you log into a website that doesn't actually need your real birthday, don't give it. Give some other birthday. And I have my online birthday and then I have my real birthday. And I store that information in my password vault so I remember what birthday I give to different websites. But the trick here is keeping those reset pathways as secure as your main login information. So it's basically secure your back door just as much as you secure your front door. It's a bit of a work to do. You can see the implementation on this I put up high because you might need to set up a whole separate email address that you use just for reset pathways. That's actually what I do. I have several different email addresses online, and one of them I only use for password resets, which means I don't send any email from it, and it would be very hard to figure out what that email address actually is. In the best case scenario, you even have a separate phone number, but that's pretty hard to do without spending a lot of money, but you can. But it's a huge security improvement because really your main protection to access of information is whatever the weakest link is. And quite often the reset can be the weakest link. This one I think is finally becoming more timely. I used to try to tell people about QR codes back in the late 90s, and they kind of went, that's weird. Nobody's ever going to use those things. I think that ship has sailed. We're using them all the time now. But it's important to think about what a QR code actually can contain and what our devices do with that information. So quite often they're a link. You can't see what that link is until you actually look at it. And many phones will give you the option to just go to the link or to review it first. You should always review it first to see where it's actually going to take you, especially if it has a link shortener like bit.ly or something. Find out where that goes before you click on it, because it could be anything. But QR codes also will join you to a Wi-Fi network. They can configure things in your phone or other device. So it's not really safe to just blindly scan and click on QR codes. You should always consider what you might be being taken to, and consider where they're posted. I've seen QR code stickers posted on random lampposts downtown. I definitely wouldn't scan one of those. They could be anything. But even more sort of innocuous is when you see a poster up, for example, you're walking through a university campus, there's lots of posters on various billboards. Some of them will have QR codes. It's really important to check and see if that QR code is actually printed on the poster or a sticker that was stuck on later. And when you're making posters for billboards, consider the fact that somebody could stick on a sticker later. That means potentially don't have a bunch of white space on your poster, big enough for somebody to slap a QR code on there. Generally, the safest place to scan a QR code is from a video screen. So like if you have video screens around campus or something like that, then it's a little safer. But I would still recommend checking where the link goes before you scan it, as anyone who has scanned the QR code that's on the screen in front of me right now will have found out. This one's kind of fun, timely for the moment, because I'm sharing a screen with you, but I'm actually not. I never share my screen. I share an application. It's very easy if you share your whole screen to accidentally disclose information. And the most common way to do this is just a message pops up while you're in the middle of a screen share, and who knows what's in that message. It could be something sensitive. So it's almost always safer to share just the application you want to share. Um, and even then, you should keep in mind if you're sharing a web browser screen, they'll be able to see your bookmarks bar, all the tabs you have open. If you start typing the address bar, it'll sometimes show the most recent history. Keep that in mind if you're sharing a browser window. Um, and close as much as you can before you really start. Especially if you do need to share your screen because you're going between multiple windows. And sometimes you can't just share a single application. But when you can do, if you can't, close off as many things as you can so you don't get those notifications that might pop up in the middle of your screen while you're sharing that are at best embarrassing and at worst disclose something sensitive. Pretty easy to do, doesn't really hurt your day-to-day too much, but it's a moderate improvement to your security. This one I'll take a little longer with, and this is about bookmarks. And at first, bookmarks for most of us, I think they think like, okay, this is a pretty handy way to save myself some time, or so I don't forget what a site was and can get back to it. And that's all absolutely true. But there's a lot of cybersecurity advantages to bookmarking everything that you think is important. And won't just restrict it to bookmarking it in your browser. You can actually put the link to most things in your password vault as well, as a way to keep your username, password, all the information about a site, and the link to that site all together in one place. And here's some of the reasons why that's important. When you're typically, if you're typing in a website, you have the option of just typoing that website. And unfortunately, criminal elements out there frequently do what's referred to as typo squatting, probably heard of it, where they'll register a URL of something very close to another site in the hopes that you'll mistype your site and land on their site, which surprisingly will look very similar to the place you were trying to go. So maybe it's Facebook with two A's in it or something. And it looks just like Facebook. You log in, now they have your login. But there's some other things that can be done as well. And I've got a picture of it there. If you look at that URL, it looks like www.ca.com. That's what it looks like, except it's not. It's a totally different address that uses Unicode to fake out the fact that it looks like ca.com. You can look up some more information about this if you search for fake domains or try to remember the name of it. It'll come to me. But a lot of the browsers now are starting to try to help with this. So if you as you see in the picture I've shown, I pasted in that www.whatlooksLikeCA.com. It's actually some Greek characters. It actually goes to this totally different place, xn-808.7a.com, which is a malware site. And the browser has expanded it out for me. It detected that it's punny code. That's what it's called punny code. Um, and they will automatically expand it. Not always, but sometimes. So even if you're seeing a link that looks right, it might still not be. And so it's almost always better if you just have the site bookmarked. That way, if you get a text message purportedly from your bank, never click that link. Just go to your bookmark for it, and you know that you're going to the right place. And that's where I'll dive into the very next slide, which is I just received a link. What should I do about it? And that really is the case. Almost never click a link you receive through pretty much any medium unless you are talking to somebody and they just told you at that moment that they're going to send you the link. Then maybe it's safer. But if it's in an email or if it's in a text message or something like that, it's a lot better to just not click it. Go to the site you know. If it's legitimate, if it's from your bank or a courier company or something, if you go to the site and enter your information, they'll have a notification there waiting for you. Otherwise, they won't. And that would be a very good indication that it's not. So if you get one of those links through any means, do the SAP protocol. Think for a moment, was I expecting this? And even if I was, I would go to my bookmarks. I see a question in the chat. Can this helpful browser feature be disabled? Um, I'm not sure, but I'm also not sure why you'd want to disable the punny code expansion. Um, in general, there's no reason ever to use punny code unless you're trying to hide a true URL. Um, and so there'd be no legitimate reason for doing it. They'll still let you go to the site if you want to, um, but unfortunately, it's usually a malicious site when they do that. So I wouldn't want to disable it if I could. It's possible that you can. I'd have to look it up. It's probably specific to each browser. And if you more question around that, feel free to drop more in the chat. Um, okay, this is perhaps quite timely. And that's about travel. I don't know about anybody else. We're getting a ton of questions around travel at UBC right now. We're updating our guidance in this area. Um, but I wanted to touch on it because this is something that's been discussed on a bunch of different venues. And I think people may have heard of the concept of a burner phone or a burner laptop or a blank laptop. I would recommend if you're crossing the border not to refer to anything you have with you as a burner phone. Um, but it can be a really important tactic to make sure that you're not transporting anything across the border. Borders of most countries, and ours included in Canada, have quite sweeping jurisdiction to do a lot of stuff in terms of searching your electronic devices. And crossing that border with the minimal amount of data with you is generally the safest way to go. So if you take a blank laptop or a blank phone with you, it's a lot safer than taking one that has a whole bunch of stuff on it that you may have even deleted, but is actually still on the storage medium. It's just no longer visible to you, but it can be accessed. So a blank one's a lot safer. Um, and so that's a really good idea. But the fact that you're traveling with a blank device in this day and age is a little bit of a like, why would you be doing that? And it might also call attention to what you're doing. So, in addition to the blank device, I'd recommend getting a letter from your employer stating why you have it. And I can't imagine an employer that wouldn't be willing to write a letter saying, we ask our staff to travel with blank devices, and that's why I'm traveling with a blank device. That's a pretty good explanation and very easy to acquire. If you can't get that, just think in advance of a reason for why you've got a blank device. Maybe it's just brand new or something like that. But I would say that having the blank device is a good starting point, but I would want to have a little bit more than that. The other thing to keep in mind when you're traveling, and maybe I should also say with this particular slide, I'm talking mostly about protecting yourself rather than protecting the electronic information of your organization or what you might have shared with you. For those types of things, follow the procedures of your organization. They should have something posted around what they want you to do when you're traveling, and it may depend on where you're traveling to. Um, but the other thing you can do in terms of protecting yourself is search for yourself online. The one thing that somebody at the border will obviously have is your full name and where you live. And so I would do a Google search and see what comes up, or a DuckDuckGo search if you're like me. See what comes up about you online and see if any of that information might be something that the regime that you're visiting wouldn't want known about you. And that's a thing to keep in mind, that they'll be able to see it just the same as you'll be able to see it. So all these travel things, this is a bit of a hard thing to implement, especially if you've, got a whole bunch of stuff online that might be, contentious and you don't want to travel with that being out there about you. You can't just erase it because it's already online. And it can be a bit of a big interference for your day-to-day life if you have to take a blank phone and you can't easily access your stuff. But it can be a big improvement, and it all depends. I put these sliders somewhere in the middle because it very much depends on who you are, what you've got out there, and where you're going. Um, but I think in the current geopolitical structure going on, it's worth thinking about these things. I did mention that the UBC Privacy Matters site has a section on travel guidance. It is UBC specific, but it's got very good general information. The CCCS, the Canadian Centre for Cybersecurity, also has several documents and articles related to traveling abroad, and I would strongly encourage you to have a read through those before you leave. And this is me saying this shortly before I'm leaving for Europe in a couple of weeks, so I've been doing the same. But all things you can consider before you go to cross a border. This one's pretty important when you're dealing with the research sort of landscape in which we work. Um, and that's thinking about shared folders. We do collaboration. That is what research does, even if we're doing it not without our organization, certainly within, where we're working together with different groups, often with external groups. This is an excellent example. We're collaborating right now, and we need to share information. And quite often in this day and age, we're doing that through some sort of online sharing system. That might be Teams, it might be Dropbox, Sync, it might be Nextcloud, who knows? There's lots and lots of different ways you do this. But in general, the practice is roughly the same. You set up a folder, you give certain people access to that folder, and then everything in that folder they can work with. What you should probably get in the habit of doing, if you're not already, is auditing those shared folders from time to time. Go and check maybe once a year who all has access to that information. Are they even still working on the project? Are they still at the institution? Um, in the past, we would generally have a network folder. And as soon as somebody left the organization, their access to that would just disappear because the central IT department would take their account offline and they wouldn't have any way to get to it. But with modern sharing, if you've shared to like a Teams folder to somebody with their Gmail address and they leave the organization, well, they still have that Gmail address and they'll still have access to everything in that folder. And that may no longer be appropriate. So it's worth looking at that folder from time to time, just see who has access and remove those that don't need it anymore. Um, the other aspect of it that can happen is you may have created the shared folder initially to share a very like low risk set of data with external individuals. And then as the project progresses, the information that's going into that folder changes. And now it's starting to get more sensitive. Oh, already have the folder. I forgot about the fact that so and so from this totally different organization has access. And now I'm putting much more sensitive stuff in there that really they shouldn't have access to. It can be tricky to even tell unless you go and actually look at the folder. Sometimes you have to go into the back end of the file sharing system to see who has access, but that's the other reason why it's worth looking from time to time. It maybe is that the data in the folder, its sensitivity has changed over time. So easy thing to do once you detect it is just remove their access. Takes a bit of work to do if you do it periodically, as you likely should, but it's a big security improvement. Next one is just about sharing photos. And because we're speaking in a research context, I'll include sharing medical imaging in this one as well. Most pictures that are taken with a modern cell phone, unless you've turned it off, and I know a lot of people do, but they will embed a bunch of information about where the picture was taken, including its latitude and longitude, sometimes very detailed, and a whole bunch of other information, time of day, direction, the light levels, all kinds of stuff that get embedded in the metadata of that photo. You don't see it unless you specifically go and look for it. But if you post that photo online directly, some sites will strip off the metadata and other sites will not. And I can give you two good examples that I know of as of last week because I tested it. Slack will strip the metadata off of a picture and Discord will not. It really depends, and some of these places it changes from time to time, but you should always check and see what's happening when you post a photo to one of these sites, whether it's adjusting the metadata in any way or not. I'm pretty sure Microsoft Teams doesn't touch it either. Um, so then you have to think, well, do I want to share the location where I took this picture with everybody who potentially could be looking at the picture? Or the other metadata associated with it. And that's why I mentioned the medical imaging, because a lot of the sensitive information in a medical image actually is contained in that metadata, the sort of side information that goes along with the picture. Once you know if you want to share it or not, you have a couple of different options. You can strip the metadata off using most operating systems. You can open the picture and take a screenshot of it and just share that. It sometimes will be a smaller image to share as well. And I use that quite often also if I want to crop the picture and not show certain parts of it. And that's in the tip here too. You should always think about what's in the background of your picture, especially reflections. So it could be that you're sharing a picture and you are very visible taking the picture in the reflection. And you don't want people to see who you are for whatever reason, or maybe there's other people in the reflection in your workplace and you shouldn't be sharing a picture of them without permission, you can do that screenshot technique and just crop out the bit that's of interest and not the reflection. Now you've stripped off all that metadata. The screenshots won't have any of it. And you've removed that potential information disclosure through the image. There's another kind of game online where people will try to figure out where a picture was taken based on the picture. It's using only open source intelligence. It's an OSINT game, geolocation, and it's amazing how easy it can be. I've participated in this myself sometimes, and I had a picture. Somebody took a picture of a shopping mall sign. And from what was in the picture of the shopping mall sign, there was no indication of location, not the name of the shopping mall, just the stores that were in it, and a couple of car license plates were in the background. And from that, I could pinpoint exactly to the street corner where they were. And this can often happen. So if you're dealing with image data in part of a research project that involves participants, it can be very important to consider what else is in the picture other than probably just the main subject and also all that metadata. So this definitely takes a little bit more doing. It can be a bit of an interference if you have a bunch of pictures and you need to strip the metadata off of all of them. There are utilities that will do this to make it a bit easier, but know where you're sharing them and why, and what metadata might be included when you do. But it's a big improvement because if you don't want the location included and you provide a picture that has it, you've basically given exactly where it was taken. This is kind of similar to the previous one, and it's about deleting information. And it almost sounds like, well, gee, thanks, Captain Obvious. But it's a really important thing to keep in mind. In that information sharing, where I was talking about auditing who has access to a folder, even if the only people that have access are the ones who should, you should think twice about what's actually in there and does it all need to still be shared? An excellent example, I think a lot of people now with their accountant might share their sensitive information relating to their taxes on some sort of a file sharing medium. Maybe it's Dropbox, maybe it's sync.com, something like that. As soon as your accountant's done with that, delete it. They don't need it anymore. Maybe wait 1 year because they might need it like the previous year for the next year's taxes. But as soon as that time period has elapsed, it doesn't need to be sitting on a publicly accessible cloud space where it could potentially get breached. If that information isn't available, it cannot be stolen. And it is really that simple. It sounds a bit like, well, that's just way too obvious, but it's a really easy thing to do. It's true of anything where we have publicly accessible information, but it's also true even on your mobile device. Like maybe you've transferred a bunch of somewhat sensitive stuff to your laptop. Laptops are a lot easier to steal than a desktop, so I would think twice about having much on there. As soon as I don't need it to be on there, I would delete it. And it's pretty easy to do. It doesn't hurt you at all because if you don't need it anymore, not having it's not going to hurt. And it's a massive improvement. And the bonus tip here is that'll also save you space, which quite often you have to pay for. So just removing it can be a huge benefit. It just takes a little bit of time to go through and see if you still need it or not. Next one is an old standby that cybersecurity people will tell you all the time, and that is just patch your software, patch your operating system. When it comes up with that reminder saying, hey, there's an update pending, don't just say, remind me later. Take the 5 minutes as soon as you can to let it run in those patches, whatever they might be. I totally understand that sometimes our great software vendors make mistakes. And I would also be one who won't necessarily patch the moment I see the update. I will check and see when it was issued. If it's within hours of issuing, I probably wait a couple of days, unless I know there's an active threat related to that vulnerability. But I like to just see, in case there's a big problem, I'll wait and see if other people have a whole bunch of pain before I install that update. But I definitely don't wait more than a day or two. I get that patch in there as soon as I can because it usually does have security fixes that are important to implement quickly. But the thing to keep in mind about this is there's so many things in our lives now that are not obviously computers that also are actually computers. And it's gotten a little bit ridiculous, but now it's things like our cars and our toasters, our smoke detectors, almost all this stuff runs on an operating system with software, and it will need patching over time. And sometimes you get patches, sometimes you don't, sometimes they're automatic, sometimes you have to go and look for them. For the lesser used appliance type things like your toaster, I don't, want to suggest that you should go and check for updates to your toaster's firmware every week, but maybe once a year, if you're letting that toaster connect to the internet, consider it. I just don't. My oven is a smart oven. It has no access. I just don't let it because I don't want to have to worry about patching it all the time. So it gets no internet access. But maybe there are things where you need it. As soon as you get something online, it's really important to keep patching it from time to time. And the other one that's really important, especially with your phone, and you may have heard this advice, but is to reboot it, even if you haven't patched it. Malware can sometimes live resident in the memory of a device. And just simply by rebooting that device, you can kick it out. It might still come back eventually, but at least you're kicking it out for the time being. And you may have heard that some of the major mobile phone vendors are going to start automatically rebooting devices if they haven't been used in a week. So if you just leave your phone sitting on the counter and don't touch it for a week, that would be great if I could do that, but I don't know too many people who can. But if you do, it'll just automatically reboot just for that precise reason. So if it hasn't been unlocked, it'll just automatically reboot, and that's why they're doing it. So the only other bonus tip with this one that you can do is set yourself a reminder. Maybe you want to do a once a quarter to check for patches for the less normal stuff, or for the more important things like your home router that may not automatically update. A lot of them are starting to now, and it's something to consider getting one that does. But if it doesn't, set yourself a reminder once a month, go and check and see if your router has new firmware that should be installed and reboot it. Routers are basically the front end of your security for your home network to the rest of the internet, which is a very dangerous place. And once a vulnerability is detected in that kind of stuff, it's exploited very quickly. So it's important to patch those things as soon as you can when there's new updates available. It does take a little bit of work, as you can see on the implementation part of this slide. It shouldn't impact your day-to-day at all. Sometimes it actually gives you benefits because it might have new features too, but it's a big improvement to security to have your software up to date. Okay, this one's for the slightly more technically inclined among us, but it's a really good piece of advice. And that is related to copying and pasting things you find on the internet. Um, I am frequently tinkering around with my home network. I run a bunch of Linux servers, and sometimes I'm going to a tutorial website to find out how to install something, and it says, oh, just put in this command, and it gives you the command you can copy and paste right into your shell, and you're probably logged in as root because you're installing software. The trick is that command might have hidden stuff in it, and there's been lots of documented cases where this has happened. Um, and they're trying to make it look like one thing, but the actual command you paste in is a whole bunch of other stuff that installs malware on your machine. Um, there's a pretty easy way to get around this. You just paste it into a text editor first, and then you can see exactly what's there. The way they hide it is either through a combination of JavaScript on the web page or style sheets that maybe put white text on a white background in between the characters that you're seeing that are black. It's very hard to see that. If you can see it at all. If they do it right, you can't tell at all. But when you select it and copy and paste it, or even if there's a copy to your clipboard button, they could put anything they want on their clipboard, on your clipboard with JavaScript when you click that button, not just what's written there. So it's a really simple thing to do, to just keep a text editor open, drop it in there first before you paste it onto the command line. I'm seeing now more and more terminal programs. I don't know if anybody here uses something called MOBA Xterm, but it will actually warn you if you're pasting more than one line of text at a time, just and show you exactly what you're going to paste in and ask, are you sure you really want to do that? Because it's unusual to be pasting lots of lines of text in. You do it, but it's unusual to do it. And therefore, it's an important thing to highlight. But I wouldn't rely on that. I would still always paste it into a text editor first, just to make sure that what you're actually going to put on your command line is what you intend to. Again, if you're not working on command line and shells frequently, this might not apply. But I would say that, given again, the context in which we're collaborating today, it might be quite common with this group. So I thought I'd bring this one to the foreground as something to think about. I mentioned software updates of appliances and smart things, Internet of Things devices that we have. Um, and it can be painful to hear this, but if you can't get software updates anymore, it's probably time to consider replacing that device. It means that you're going to have to spend some money. This is a painful implementation. But if you can't patch it and it does have a vulnerability, there's nothing you can do to prevent that vulnerability from being exploited. And they will get exploited. A lot of the botnets that we have out there right now, good chunk of them are based on really old devices that have never been patched or can't be patched anymore, that are running insecure old operating systems or old software. And it's super simple for cyber criminals to just get in there and do whatever they want. From a research context, it's really important to think about this. Plan it ahead in your budget. You can often get warranty on most tech things for 3 to 5 years as part of your initial purchase, somewhere in there. Make sure you get as much as you can up front because it's almost always cheaper. But also keep in mind that, once that thing goes end of life, you should start planning for its eventual replacement. Unless it's something that's not online at all, maybe like I'm not suggesting that a offline microscope needs to be kept patched all the time and replaced after 5 years. But if it's something that's actually internet facing and people will be accessing it from the internet, then keeping that patched or coming up with some other mitigation to protect it is going to be pretty important. Almost all institutional policy frameworks are going to require this anyway. So it's something to keep in mind. But for your home as well, if something is starting to get to the age where you can't keep its software up to date, I would strongly suggest looking at a replacement and or just take it offline if it's not needing to be online. A lot of stuff that we have that smarts kind of has a cool factor for a little bit, and then maybe you go, I don't really need to know that my oven temperature is preheated on my cell phone. I can just go and look at it. So maybe I don't need that oven to have internet access anymore now that I can't update its firmware. This one's very similar to the previous one, what I mentioned about auditing shared folders, but a little different because now I'm talking about auditing authorized applications or apps. Um, Really common. I know I have had this problem on my phone too. I hear about some new app and I think, oh, I'll have a look at that, keeping in mind the trust item I talked about earlier. And the next slide is going to talk about this more, so I won't dig into it a little bit before I install that app. But let's say I install it, I play with it a little bit, it's kind of fun, and then I basically never use it again. Whatever that app might be, there's lots of different situations where your phone will eventually over time build up a cruft of old apps. And a lot of these apps you authorized to do something. My favorite example is conference apps. Anybody here that's gone to a conference, quite often now they get you to install an app. The app will ask for permissions like be able to send you notifications and be able to read your notifications and get your location and share photos and access your photos. That's quite a lot of authorization you're giving that app. And so I go to the conference and I use it, and it needs a lot of that stuff during the conference, but it doesn't need it when I'm done. Now, a month, 2 months, a year later, that app might still be on my phone and still have all those permissions assigned to it. The other thing that can happen with apps, and frequently does, is they get sold. So maybe I trusted the person who created this app in the first place. Maybe they were a well-known, reputable developer, and I was like, okay, yeah, I don't mind giving this group these permissions on my phone. And then 2 years later, they get sold to some unsavory, unknown company who has very different motivation of why they want to have that app. Your access that you've given that app is part of that sale. So now they can change the app, which of course will automatically update on your phone to do completely different things. So with that somewhat disturbing thought in mind, always think about what apps you've allowed to have on your phone, what access they have, and do you really still need them? In most cases, if you're not even sure, just uninstall it. You can always reinstall the app. A lot of this stuff is free anyway. If it's something paid for, you might think differently, or if you're worried about losing access to information the app may have stored, that's a different decision that you have to go through. But if you're really not using it, that app may have been granted permissions on your phone you just don't want. If you're really not sure, you can often revoke the permissions you've granted the app. That's better. But if you don't need it, just get rid of it. It'll also save space on your phone. And I will do one more, and then I'll stop in case there's any other questions. And also, so I don't want to keep everybody beyond the time. But related to that, and related to what I said right at the very beginning about trust, is supply chain trust. And it's very difficult in this day and age to understand all the different components that go into a piece of software. Open source software and even proprietary software is built on numerous libraries, sometimes thousands of libraries that come from all different places. And this problem has always been a challenge, but it's getting a little bit worse now that we have so much coding being done by various AIs. In a recent episode of one of my favorite podcasts, and I've linked it in the resources, called Security Now. And if you're remotely interested in cybersecurity, I wholeheartedly recommend it. It's a weekly podcast. They talk about AI slop squatting, which is a weird name. And what they found is that when you ask some of these large language models to write a piece of code, it will often include libraries. But as we all know, AI is often just making stuff up. And so it'll say, boy, it'd be really great if there was a library that did this perfect function for what I need. So I'll include that library. Only problem is that library doesn't exist. There is no such thing. So it just makes it up and includes it as part of the code. What the cyber criminals are realizing is the libraries that these AIs are starting to include are somewhat consistent. So they're now creating libraries with those names that do malicious things. So now your AI generated code is including a library that has absolutely no basis in reality, but criminals have now created a copy of and posted to the package repositories for whatever language you're using. And that library will get sucked in and included in your code unless you're very carefully looking at what your AI output generated included. So this is a whole new threat that's coming in this area, but always think about who you're trusting when you're looking at building a piece of software and including a bunch of libraries. Think about whether you actually need a library to do that thing or if you could just write it from scratch. Quite often there'll be a massive library and you only need one function. Much better to just get the one function or write the one function yourself. It can make your code more efficient, smaller, and faster. But if you do have to have a whole bunch of libraries included in something, consider something that's called a software bill of materials. It lists all the included libraries in a piece of software. A lot of more stringent, sensitive research projects, if you're working together with any Department of Defense research projects or a lot of corporations, they will require software bills of materials. And the reason is they can then tell what all is in the thing, basically like a massive ingredients list, so they can scan those libraries to see if there's any known vulnerabilities. So they're very useful, especially when you have automated means to work with them because they're sometimes quite long, but it is something to keep in mind. Unfortunately, this is a lot of work to implement, and it can really interfere with your day-to-day, but we've seen multiple examples recently of malware being injected into either well-known packages or typo squatting packages where it's very similar name, but not quite the same thing. Or, and I think we're going to see more of this, the now termed, I'm not sure why they picked this term, slop squatting, where there was a package that was typically included by a large language model that never existed and now exists only as malware to trip up people who are coding with AI. So a little bit of scary stuff there to keep in mind, but it's important to always have that in the back of your head. What all are you including? So why don't I stop here briefly? We've got about 4 minutes left and see if anybody else had any questions. I can let you know that that's halfway through the slide deck. There's lots more slides. So once you have the slide access to the slides, and I know Alex will post them when he has time, Feel free to look through the rest. There's lots of other tips. They're all in the same basic format. So I think you've got a feel for how they look now.